Three Amigos is one of those movies that my family and I watched countless times while I was growing up, and I doubt I've gone a year since without rewatching it at least once. At this point, I can pretty much recite all the dialogue by heart. It simply never gets old, and never fails to make me laugh.
I would not like to think that a person would tell someone he has a plethora and find out that that person has no idea what it means to have a plethora.
There is a lot I could talk about with this movie, but in this video I want to focus on something that I've come to appreciate more in the last few years of rewatching it. That being how the director John Landis used costume design, set design, and production design in general to make this film compelling and funny simply on a visual level.
Dear little buttercup, sweet little buttercup, my little buttercup.
As soon as the audience is immersed in the setting of Revolution-era Mexico, well, after the opening song I mean, it quickly becomes apparent that this environment is gritty and realistic. Costume designer and, incidentally, John Landis' wife, Deborah Nadoolman, had worked with Steven Spielberg on earlier period films 1941 and Raiders of the Lost Ark. She brought a level of authenticity to Landis' Three Amigos that you might not expect from a goofy comedy. Likewise, the set designer Richard Godard and production designer Richard Sawyer brought a high level of realism and detail to the set interiors, location exteriors, and props. Even the casting department delivered on the appearance of the extras. I mean, look at these faces. These guys look like real low-life Mexican banditos of the era.
They call those scum-sucking pigs us!
And this guy, can you picture a more scummy-looking American cowboy who's probably only hanging around Mexico because he's wanted for horrible crimes in the States? Not to mention the costumes and casting of the German pilot and his friends. To this day, this actor is the most German-looking German guy I could possibly imagine.
I'm looking for a man by the name of El Guapo.
I'm sure Landis and the art department looked at loads of historical photos and other references to make sure the look of Mexico during this era was as accurate as possible. The detail and little touches in production design establish a believable level of reality for the story. But why does that matter in a comedy? It matters because comedy often comes from contrast. Landis took the trouble to establish a gritty, realistic world, so it would be all the more hilarious when the Three Amigos enter this world and look as if they've stepped right out of the silver screen. Everyone in this bar is dirty, grimy, and weathered, but the Amigos are literally sparkling.
Looks like somebody's been down here with the ugly stick.
This image pretty much sums up the theme of this movie, and the idea at the heart of its humor, which is that these guys simply don't belong in this gritty, realistic world, but they think they do.
We're not Mexicans. We're from out of town.
Of course, the Amigos adapt to this world eventually, but that is the arc of their characters and the story as a whole. Before the third act, however, the Amigos represent the polished fiction of Hollywood, while everyone else represents the harsh reality of Mexico. This contrast registers without the Amigos having to say a word, but I'm not trying to downplay the performances either.
Do you have anything besides Mexican food?
Steve, Chevy, and Martin deliver every line brilliantly, and obviously have no ego about making the funniest possible choices, even if it makes them look really stupid and ridiculous. In fact, the entire cast is great, from Flugelman to El Guapo, Jefe, even the bartender.
This town's getting too rough for me.
But the production design aids in creating an immersive world, where their performances have all the more impact.
A gringo's falling from the sky!
An interesting way the film uses set design later on occurs during the midpoint of the film. The realistic tone that was established during the first half of the movie is suddenly stripped away, and swapped for a much less believable reality that involves talking turtles, singing bushes, and invisible swordsmen. Landis uses set design to prepare the audience for this shift in reality, making the transition less jarring. Before the Amigos decide to become heroes for real, the film uses realistic sets or is shot on location. But after the Amigos ride toward El Guapo's fortress, they suddenly appear in an obvious set that looks intentionally unrealistic.
Blue shadows on the trail.
The set where the Amigos sing Blue Shadows is likely a nod to singing cowboys of old musical westerns or variety shows that tended to use obvious sets as a backdrop for musical performances. The contrast of this set to the previous ones lets the audience know on an instinctive level that the level of reality has shifted and things are about to get crazy. The midsection of Three Amigos may also be a nod to a literary genre that originated and flourished in Latin America, called magical realism. Magical realism establishes a realistic world, but draws the reader into magical story elements, like fables, myths, and the supernatural, presenting these elements with the same authenticity as the realistic elements. So, in a way, this genre also uses contrasting levels of reality as a story device. This section of Three Amigos may be an homage to Mexican magical realism. Or it might simply be an excuse to get really silly before the Amigos reach El Guapo's fortress, and the tone again becomes more realistic. The premise of soft characters faking their way through a hard environment has been done more than a few times in comedic films, and some of these lift the premise of Three Amigos pretty blatantly. While some of these films are hilarious, they rarely have as much impact as Three Amigos, perhaps in part because the fish-out-of-water characters don't visually contrast the world they are thrust into. Yes, there are other aspects of Three Amigos I could focus on, like the script, the performances, or the use of music, but other videos on YouTube have probably touched on these already. Production design, on the other hand, is often overlooked in comedic movies. Three Amigos is a great example of how it can enhance humor by placing contrasting images side by side. But I'd like to know what comedy films you enjoy that use visual contrast or production design to enhance the humor. If you'd like to see a plethora of videos covering interesting storytelling techniques in classic or new movies, please like this vid and subscribe. Or donate to my channel Patreon by clicking on the link in the description below. Thanks, and
Good night, Ned.